February 17, 1943. Luftwaffe Base, Rostov-on-Don. Oberst Heinrich Krieger stood before 24 fighter pilots in the wooden briefing room, frost still clinging to the windows despite the coal stove blazing in the corner. The previous night's raid had destroyed 17 tons of ammunition, and none of the men had slept more than 3 hours. Krieger's Iron Cross caught the lamplight as he gestured at the intelligence photos spread across the table, grainy images showing fabric-winged biplanes that looked older than the pilots tracking them. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying equal parts exhaustion and contempt. "Command has confirmed what our forward observers reported. The Soviets are sending women against us. Women flying crop dusters from 1928. The room erupted. Hauptmann Otto Weber raised his glass of schnapps in mock toast. Perhaps Stalin will send their grandmothers next, armed with pitchforks? Laughter rolled through the assembled pilots, men who had collectively shot down over 400 Allied aircraft. Another officer suggested the Soviets might as well attach bombs to their farm animals and push them out of transport planes. Krieger allowed the ridicule to continue for nearly a minute before calling for order. "These so-called night witches fly wooden training aircraft," he explained, reading from the intelligence brief. "No radios, no weapons, no armor. They carry 4 small bombs, drop them by hand, and flee." He looked up from the papers. "Command estimates we will eliminate this nuisance within 2 weeks. The Ju-88s stationed here can outrun these museum pieces by a factor of 3. 1 squadron should suffice." The pilots nodded, several already making plans for the extra sleep they would enjoy once the raid stopped. Weber declared he would personally shoot down 5 in a single sortie. The room cheered. What Oberst Krieger didn't know was that Senior Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova was already airborne at that exact moment, 20 kilometers south of his briefing room. The 21-year-old pilot from Donetsk had completed her 183rd mission of what would eventually become 852 individual sorties, making her one of the deadliest bomber pilots of the war. She was part of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, an all-female unit that would collectively fly more than 24,000 missions before the war ended. Popova had already survived being shot down twice, had delivered over 40 tons of explosives onto German positions, and had navigated through anti-aircraft fire so intense her canvas wings bore 31 bullet holes from a single mission the previous week. Krieger's base would be hit 4 more times before the week ended. The ammunition depot he was currently standing 200 meters from would be completely destroyed in 47 hours. Krieger himself would request emergency transfer to France within a month, citing extraordinary operational stress and irregular enemy tactics. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, represented the culmination of 5 years of brutal lessons purchased with blood. After 73 pilots froze to death during the winter of 1940, the Luftwaffe mandated fully enclosed heated cockpits for all night operations. 17 fatal collisions in a 6-week period led to required radio communication between all aircraft. When 28 pilots died from preventable crash injuries in 1941, parachutes became mandatory equipment, adding 40 pounds to every aircraft. The Battle of Britain had proven that night bombing required speed, establishing 180 miles per hour as the absolute minimum for survivability. German engineers calculated every requirement from actual combat casualties, each specification written in the blood of pilots who had died, proving why that feature mattered. The Junkers Ju-88 embodied these hard-won lessons perfectly. Cruising speed of 300 miles per hour, crew of 4 with radio communication, FUG-220 Liechtenstein radar, twin BMW engines producing 2,400 horsepower, armor plating protecting vital systems, ejection seats, and oxygen systems for high-altitude flight. Between 1940 and 1942, Ju-88 night fighters had destroyed 357 British bombers, establishing Germany as the world's authority on night combat aviation. The confidence German pilots felt was not arrogance. It was earned through systematic victory against the most advanced air forces in the world. While German engineers perfected these requirements based on their casualties, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant somewhere over the frozen Caucasus. On the night of January 12, 1943, she flew her 147th mission targeting a forward supply depot near Mineralny Vody. She flew with no radio, communicating with her navigator through hand signals and shouted words that immediately froze in the -40-degree air. She carried no parachute because the PO-2 flew too low for it to deploy anyway. Her maximum speed of 94 miles per hour meant she violated the German minimum survivability threshold by nearly 50%. Her aircraft was constructed entirely from wood and canvas, materials German doctrine had abandoned as suicidally vulnerable. Yet she approached the target in complete darkness, throttled her already anemic 100-horsepower engine to near idle, glided in absolute silence to within 50 meters of the depot, and dropped 4 bombs by hand directly onto stacked fuel barrels. The resulting explosion destroyed 3 weeks of gasoline reserves. She climbed away at maximum power, while bullets from confused German sentries stitched lines through her lower wings, the rounds passing through canvas without encountering anything solid enough to stop them. This was Mission 147 of what would eventually become 852, part of the Night Witch's collective 24,000 missions that German doctrine insisted were impossible. German officers at the depot filed reports describing equipment malfunction or sabotage. The possibility that a woman in a wooden biplane had just destroyed their fuel supply seemed too absurd to mention. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established through 5 years of methodical engineering. The Polikarpov PO-2 was flying Kindling, a biplane constructed from pine wood frames covered in canvas fabric, literally treated with what amounted to aircraft-grade bedsheets. In temperatures that routinely dropped to -40 degrees Celsius, pilots flew in open cockpits with no windscreens, their breath forming ice crystals on their eyelashes that had to be chipped away manually to maintain vision. Severe frostbite was not a risk but a certainty. The aircraft carried no radios because weight restrictions and electrical interference made them impossible to install, forcing pilots to communicate through hand signals visible in darkness or not at all. No parachutes were issued because the PO-2 operated at altitudes where a parachute couldn't deploy before impact anyway. No armor protected the crew because adding metal plating would exceed the aircraft's structural weight limits. The specification comparison read like a joke. The PO-2's maximum speed of 94 miles per hour was less than half the German minimum, making it slower than most automobiles on a highway. Its single M11 radial engine produced 100 horsepower, 1/24th the power of a Ju-88's twin engines. The aircraft had been designed in 1928 as a trainer for student pilots, making it older than many of the women flying it. It cost approximately $5,000 to produce compared to the Ju-88's $80,000, and could be built in 3 weeks versus 3 months. The Night Witches flew wooden training aircraft converted to bombers, carrying 4 FAB-50 bombs weighing 50 kilograms each, dropped manually by the navigator leaning over the side and releasing them by hand. It was, by every measure of modern military aviation, absurd. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into weapons. The PO-2's primitive construction enabled impossibly rapid turnaround times that allowed the Night Witches to fly the multiple sorties per night that contributed to their regiment's 24,000 total missions. While a Ju-88 required 40 minutes to refuel, rearm, and pre-flight, the PO-2 needed 4 minutes for fuel, 3 minutes to load 4 bombs onto external racks, and 90 seconds for the pilot to verify control surfaces. Popova regularly flew 8 missions in a single night, departing her forward airfield, bombing a target, returning, rearming, and departing again within 15 minutes. The simplicity that looked like weakness on paper became operational tempo that German logistics couldn't match. On the night of March 3, 1943, Popova's aircraft took 24 bullet holes from a Ju-88 that had finally maneuvered into firing position. The rounds passed through canvas and wood, several punching clean through both lower wings. Not one encountered anything vital. No fuel tanks exploded because they were positioned away from typical firing angles. No hydraulic lines ruptured because the PO-2 had none. No electrical systems failed because none existed. Popova landed, ground crew patched the holes with fabric and glue, and she flew 2 more missions that night. Her assessment, recorded in her diary: "If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, that bullet would have ricocheted inside the fuselage until it found me. The Germans designed aircraft to fight their war, building faster, stronger, deadlier. We designed tactics to fight ours, accepting every weakness their doctrine feared, and turning those weaknesses into advantages they couldn't counter. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from March 28, 1943, concluded, the deployment of female pilots operating obsolete PO2 training aircraft in night harassment capacity represents a desperate measure indicating severe shortages in both qualified pilots and modern manufacturing capacity within the Soviet aviation establishment. The aircraft's wooden construction, fabric covering, primitive equipment suite, and complete absence of modern defensive systems render these units extremely vulnerable to conventional interception. The laws of physics remain immutable regardless of pilot determination. Speed, metal construction, and modern avionics will invariably defeat slow, wooden, obsolete aircraft in any sustained engagement. Current operational predictions estimate Soviet night harassment operations will cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. Calculated advantages favor German night fighters by factors of 3 to 1 in speed, 24 to 1 in horsepower, 15 to 1 in cost efficiency, with additional superiority in radar, communications, and defensive armament. Assessment. Soviet female night bomber units represent temporary morale impact through sleep disruption of forward elements, but constitute no serious operational threat to German strategic capabilities or supply infrastructure. Recommendation. Monitor development but do not prioritize allocation of specialized countermeasures or dedicate significant resources to elimination. Standard night fighter patrols prove sufficient for eventual suppression. This assessment carried the full authority of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers, men who had designed the most advanced aircraft in the world. It was comprehensively, catastrophically wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat as temporary harassment requiring no special response, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling the supply infrastructure their entire southern front depended on. On April 4, 1943, 6 days after the Luftwaffe assessment declared the Night Witches operationally insignificant, Popova led a 3-aircraft formation against an ammunition train stopped at a depot near Krimskaya. She had conducted 312 missions by this point, rapidly approaching the 852 that would eventually make her one of the most decorated pilots in Soviet military history, contributing substantially to the Night Witches' total of 24,000 missions. The target held artillery shells, rifle ammunition, and explosives destined for German positions at the Kuban bridgehead. Popova's bombs struck 3 ammunition cars simultaneously. The resulting explosion was visible from 40 kilometers away and continued burning for 11 hours. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable catastrophic losses that directly contradicted the technical assessment's conclusion that the PO2 units posed no serious operational threat. Supply requisitions from the Southern Front increased by 18% in the following month, straining logistics networks the assessment had declared secure from Soviet night operations. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error, one that would cost them thousands of tons of supplies and permanently disrupt their night operations across the entire Eastern Front. Their mathematics seemed irrefutable. A Ju-88 cruising at 300 miles per hour against a PO2 barely managing 94 miles per hour created a speed advantage ratio of 3.2 to 1. By every principle of aerial combat, this should have meant easy interception and systematic destruction. A faster aircraft can always catch a slower one, choose the engagement angle, and destroy the target before it can respond. What German engineers critically overlooked in their calculations was that aerial interception requires matching speed with the target, not merely exceeding it. A fighter must slow down to the bomber's speed to maintain firing position and ensure hits. This is where aerodynamic reality destroyed German tactical assumptions. Every aircraft has a stall speed, the minimum velocity at which the wings generate enough lift to maintain controlled flight. Below that speed, the aircraft enters an uncontrolled descent that usually ends in a crash. The Ju-88, with its heavy metal construction, substantial payload, and high wing loading, stalled at approximately 120 miles per hour. The PO2, with its light wooden frame, massive wing area, and minimal weight, operated comfortably at 80 miles per hour and could glide with engine completely idle at 60 miles per hour. The Night Witches routinely flew below the German minimum survivable speed. This created an impossible scenario. German pilots had to either fly past the POW too fast to maintain firing position, or slow down to tracking speed and risk catastrophic stall. No middle ground existed in the physics. On September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad, Hauptmann Werner Schmidt attempted interception of a PO2 formation. He reduced speed to 130 miles per hour to maintain a firing solution. The Soviet pilot, possibly Popova herself, though records remain unclear, immediately throttled her engine to minimum power and entered a controlled glide at approximately 70 miles per hour. Schmidt's Ju-88 began showing stall warnings, wing buffeting becoming severe as his airspeed dropped toward the edge of controllable flight. He was forced to abort the engagement or crash. His official report noted, "Target speed below minimum engagement threshold. Interception deemed tactically impossible without unacceptable risk of structural failure." Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable through the hundreds of missions that contributed to the Night Witches' extraordinary total of 24,000 sorties. On the night of June 17, 1943, during her 428th mission, she encountered a Ju-88 night fighter that had been specifically vectored to intercept her formation. She detected the fighter's approach through the sound of its engines, a distant roar that carried across the night sky. She immediately throttled her M11 engine to absolute minimum power, just enough to maintain directional control, and descended to within 50 meters of the ground. The German pilot made 4 separate attack passes, each time overshooting her position because his minimum controllable speed exceeded her maximum by 40 miles per hour. On his final attempt, desperate to score the kill, he reduced speed to approximately 115 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour above his aircraft's stall threshold. His wings began wobbling, the Ju-88 shuddering as it approached the edge of controlled flight. He was forced to abandon the intercept and apply full power to climb away, or risk stalling and crashing into the Ukrainian darkness. Popova continued to her target, dropped her bombs, and returned safely. This tactic, repeated across her eventual 852 missions and multiplied across all the Night Witches pilots flying their collective 24,000 sorties, proved that the PO2's slowness was not a weakness requiring mitigation, but a weapon German doctrine had no answer for. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed. And Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. German fighters were optimized to intercept fast bombers like the Il-4 and PE-2 flying at 250 mph or more. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 were designed to chase, not slow match. Physics imposed absolute limitations. Aircraft must maintain minimum speed or fall. Cruising at 300 mph, overshooting targets was inevitable. Slowing to 150 mph brought dangerous proximity to stall at 120 mph. The PO2 operating at 80 mph, gliding at 60 mph, created an untouchable zone. German pilots trained for pursuit, not precision slow-speed engagement. Target acquisition at high speed offered a 2 to 3 second window. With a differential of 200 mph, weapons lock was impossible. On April 8, 1943, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage on her 327th mission, targeting an artillery depot near Taman. She detected a German fighter by engine sound in the distance. Immediate response, throttled to minimum power, 65 mph. The German fighter made 4 passes, overshooting each time. The pilot's frustration was visible through wobbling wings, steep banks trying to circle back. Each pass gave her time to adjust course toward the target. She completed her bombing run while the German fighter burned fuel attempting interception. This tactic, perfected across the regiment's eventual 24,000 missions, made the PO2 impossible to shoot down. Target destroyed, PO2 returned safely. German reported successful target evasion. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO2's greatest vulnerability. In metal aircraft, a bullet strikes aluminum, penetrates, creates shrapnel, ricochets inside the fuselage, hits fuel lines, hydraulics, Crew. German ammunition was designed for metal targets, explosive rounds, incendiary tracers. Armor-piercing rounds wasted energy penetrating non-existent armor. Canvas aircraft presented different dynamics. Bullet passes through fabric, exits, no energy transfer, no shrapnel, no secondary damage. Wood frame received clean holes unless directly hitting structural spars. Vital systems like engine, fuel tank, crew occupied small percentage of aircraft volume. Canvas tears didn't affect aerodynamics significantly. Repairs required canvas patches in 30 minutes versus metal welding requiring hours. German pilots reported hits but no kills. Bullets passed through without effect. During Mission 389 on May 19, 1943, Popova proved this advantage definitively attacking an armor concentration near Novorossiysk. Heavy interception. 42 bullet holes perforated her aircraft, 27 holes in the upper wing alone. Bullets struck wings, fuselage, tail, but missed vital areas. Specific close call. Bullet passed through cockpit area 10 centimeters from her head, perforating canvas behind without hitting her. Ground crew's reaction after inspection showed shock, but aircraft deemed still airworthy after quick patches. She flew 3 additional missions that night in the same damaged aircraft. This aircraft would carry her through 50 more missions before being retired. Her assessment recorded in her diary, "In their metal planes I would be dead, our canvas saved me." But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale. German searchlight and anti-aircraft systems relied on acoustic detection. Sound-ranging equipment triangulated engine noise for targeting. Standard procedure. Hear engines, activate searchlights, anti-aircraft fire. Fighters scrambled. The Night Witches discovered a tactic that may have been accidental initially, but became operational doctrine. They would approach at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle. Germans heard and prepared. At 3,000 feet, they idled engines completely. They glided in total silence for 5 to 6 minutes. They dropped bombs before Germans realized aircraft were overhead. They restarted engines after bombs exploded. Physics explained effectiveness. POW to glide ratio approximately 1:10. Losing 1 foot of altitude per 10 feet forward. From 3,000 feet meant 30,000 feet gliding distance, 5.6 miles. At glide speed of 60 mph, resulted in 5.6 minutes of silent approach. Only sound. Wind through canvas wings, soft rustling, not engine roar. Psychological effect, Germans hearing nothing, seeing nothing, then explosions. On the night of June 2, 1943, during operations that contributed to the regiment's eventual 24,000 missions, Popova used the silent approach 7 consecutive times targeting a German command post near Temryuk. Approach with engines loud, Germans prepared defenses. Cut engines at 2,800 feet. Silent glide directly over German positions. She could hear German soldiers calling to each other below. "Where are the planes?" Dropped bombs on target while Germans searched empty sky with searchlights. Explosions illuminated their faces looking up at nothing above. Restarted engine only after clearing target area. She would repeat the silent approach hundreds of times across her career of 852 missions. Her quote, "We were ghosts they couldn't fight. They feared the silence more than the bombs." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The Ju-88 presented impressive specifications: 300 mmHg, 2,400 horsepower, radar, radios, armor, crew of 4. Cost and production totaled $80,000, 3 months to build. Required skilled labor, precision manufacturing. Operational tempo allowed 1 to 2 sorties per night maximum. Maintenance between missions consumed 3 to 4 hours, including systems checks, refueling, rearming, crew rest. Crew fatigue came from 4 men coordinating in high-stress environment. Average Ju-88 night fighter career lasted 40 to 60 missions before loss or crew rotation. Survival rate approximately 60%. Many lost to weather, navigation errors, mechanical failure, not combat. The POW contrasted brutally. Primitive specifications: 94 mmHg, 100 horsepower, no radar, no radios, no armor, crew of 2. Cost and production totaled $5,000, 3 weeks to build. required minimal skilled labor. Operational tempo allowed 8 to 18 sorties per night. Maintenance between missions totaled 7 minutes. 4 minutes refuel, 3 minutes reload bombs. Crew coordination simplified. 2 women who had flown together hundreds of times. Average night witch career lasted 800 to 1,000 missions. Survival rate of 96.8%. Losses almost entirely from ground fire, not fighters. The paradox revealed itself. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft produced lower operational effectiveness. Simpler, cheaper aircraft produced higher operational effectiveness. German advantage in technology became disadvantage in logistics. These statistics were embodied in Popova's operational record. On the specific night flying 18 missions, she started at 2,200 hours, ended at 0530 hours. Average of 25 minutes per complete cycle, including flight to target, bombing, return, refuel, reload, launch. Ground crew efficiency. Mechanics prepared aircraft faster than she walked from debriefing to cockpit. Total bombs dropped that night. 72 FAB-50 bombs. German positions hit included ammunition depot, barracks, vehicle park, command post. German casualties estimated 140 killed or wounded. Relevant comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe pilot flew maximum 4 sorties in one night. By this point in the war, her eventual 852 missions were becoming legendary even among German soldiers fighting them. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern. German expenditure attempting to stop the night witches included anti-aircraft ammunition. Over 2 million rounds fired specifically at night witches. At 50, Reichsmarks per AA shell totaled 100 million Reichsmarks, $40 million. Fighter sorties, over 1,000 dedicated intercept attempts. At 500 Reichsmarks, operational cost per sortie totaled 500,000 Reichsmarks. Searchlight batteries, over 200 units deployed for night defense. Personnel, over 5,000 soldiers assigned to counter night harassment. Total German cost, over 50 million Reichsmarks to counter night witches. Soviet investment in the 588th Regiment contrasted dramatically. 40 PO2 aircraft multiplied by $5,000 totaled $200,000. Ammunition cost a fraction of defensive ammunition against them. Personnel included 80 pilots and navigators. Minimal ground crew, 150 total. Total Soviet cost, under $2 million for entire regiment. Cost ratio revealed asymmetry. Germans spending 25.1 trying to stop what Soviets spent creating. Effectiveness showed German failure. 0 confirmed fighter kills on night witches. Result represented perfect asymmetric warfare. Minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain. Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency. If Germans fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her per mission, her 852 missions totaled 852,000 rounds fired at her. At 50 Reichsmarks per round totaled 42.6 million Reichsmarks spent trying to kill one woman. Result: she survived. Her bombs destroyed an estimated 100 tons of ammunition, 50 vehicles, critical infrastructure. Value of German material destroyed, estimated 80 million Reichsmarks. Comparison illustrated disparity. Average USAAF bomber crew rotated home after 25 missions. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty. She represented more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters. Her 852 missions made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets, and Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation that would shake Wehrmacht doctrine to its foundation. On October 23, 1942, near Maikop, German forces overran a Soviet airfield during a rapid advance. The hasty evacuation left behind documents that would change everything. A German intelligence officer, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, sorted through abandoned papers in what had been the operations building. The first document was a flight roster listing pilot-navigator pairs for the previous week's missions. Names leaped from the page: Nadezhda, Irina, Yevgenia, Raisa, Katya. All unmistakably feminine. Weber initially dismissed it as clerical error or Soviet propaganda attempting to deceive German intelligence. The second document shattered that assumption. Personnel records showing birth dates, ages ranging from 18 to 23, and service files explicitly noting female pilots. The third document eliminated all doubt, awards citations for combat valor, mentioning specific missions, using feminine grammatical forms throughout Russian military terminology. Weber cross-referenced these names with pilot logs recovered from damaged aircraft. The same names appeared across hundreds of documented missions spanning 6 months. He stared at the papers, realization dawning with cold certainty. These were actual combat pilots conducting sustained operations against Wehrmacht positions, not instructors or farriers. His report to Division Command carried the classification, urgent, requires immediate verification. The report reached Battalion Commander Oberst Klaus Dietrich first. His initial response, scrawled in margin notes still preserved in archives, read, "Impossible. Verify source authenticity. Likely disinformation." But multiple confirmations arrived that same week from different sectors along the Caucasus front. Each reported similar findings. Female names on captured documents. Female prisoners from downed aircraft. Consistent testimony from Soviet deserters. The evidence escalated to division, then corps, then Army Group headquarters. At each level, the pattern repeated. Initial disbelief followed by verification, skepticism overcome by documentation. Wehrmacht intelligence conducted systematic analysis, cross-referencing aircraft serial numbers appearing in multiple raid reports over months, matching them with documented Night Witch operational patterns. The conclusion became unavoidable. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was entirely female, had been operational since May 1942, and was responsible for the systematic harassment that had cost millions of Reichsmarks and thousands of disrupted operations. When the briefing reached High Command, General Obermeister Ernst Hoffmann presented findings to a room of senior officers confronted with irrefutable evidence. Intelligence photographs showed young women in flight suits. Captured documents, detailed training, assignments, combat decorations. The same aircraft tail numbers appeared across hundreds of incident reports. Women were responsible for the operations that had frustrated Germany's most advanced night air defense system. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that went beyond tactical considerations into ideological territory. Disbelief remained pervasive. Many officers refused acceptance initially, demanding additional verification, suggesting elaborate Soviet deception. When evidence became overwhelming, humiliation followed. Elite Luftwaffe pilots trained at the finest aviation schools in Europe had been systematically beaten by women flying obsolete crop dusters. The propaganda implications were catastrophic. How could this be explained to the German public, to frontline troops, to the world? Nazi doctrine about women's proper roles collided violently with operational reality. If women could accomplish this, fundamental assumptions about Soviet capabilities and German superiority required reevaluation. Luftwaffe pilots began requesting transfers rather than admit being bested by female pilots. Some officers insisted on referring to them exclusively as Soviet night harassment units in official documentation, carefully avoiding any reference to gender. Luftwaffe High Command actively suppressed information, fearing widespread morale impact if troops learned the truth. Frontline soldiers' reactions differed from command's institutional denial, grudging respect mixed with genuine fear. The nickname Nachthexen spread rapidly among infantry despite official discouragement. Some German units requested dedicated anti-Night Witch defensive resources. Others refused to acknowledge gender entirely, focusing exclusively on tactical threat. Operational Order 4427, dated November 8, 1942, exemplified the command response. All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender characteristics. This directive issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop effectiveness and morale. While German command struggled with revelation and denial, Nadezhda Popova was flying her 412th mission, completely unaware that Germans had just confirmed her regiment's composition. She learned of the discovery weeks later through intelligence briefings, and her response was characteristically direct. By the time Germans confirmed her regiment's nature, she had already completed over 400 of her eventual 852 missions, contributing substantially to the regiment's collective 24,000 sorties. On November 3, 1942, during the period of German command crisis, she led a formation against a fuel depot near Krimskaya. Her bombs ignited storage tanks containing diesel for an entire panzer division. The resulting fire burned for 19 hours and was visible from 40 kilometers. Her assessment, recorded in her diary that night: "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs. They die the same, regardless." The discovery changed nothing operationally. The Night Witches continued their relentless mission tempo, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators systematically collected testimonies from German prisoners of war, documenting Eastern Front experiences. When interrogations turned to night operations and specifically to encounters with Night Witches, unexpected consistency emerged across hundreds of interviews. Even hardened SS officers showed visible reactions when the topic arose. Patterns crystallized from testimony after testimony, revealing psychological impact that had gone far beyond tactical frustration. Oberleutnant Hans Kruger, Ju-88 night fighter pilot from Nachtjagdgeschwader 4, captured in April 1945 near Berlin, provided testimony that exemplified the pattern. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in autumn 1942. Command did not inform us they were women. We learned only after war's end. I attempted interception 17 separate times. 17 failures. The aircraft operated below my minimum engagement speed. Stall warnings activated every approach when I attempted to match their velocity. It was professionally humiliating. You train for years mastering the Ju-88. You face British Lancaster bombers successfully. You understand air combat doctrine thoroughly. Then a wooden biplane from 1928 makes you appear incompetent. When I learned after surrender they were female pilots, I had no adequate words. We could not engage them because physics prevented it. Gender was operationally irrelevant. They had exploited aerodynamic principles in ways our doctrine never anticipated." Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker, anti-aircraft battery commander in eastern Ukraine sector, testified similarly. "My battery expended approximately 47,000 rounds at these aircraft between October 1942 and August 1943. We achieved perhaps 3 confirmed hits across 22 months. Their approach pattern remained consistent. Engines audible at distance, we prepared defensive fire, then complete silence. We discharged weapons at estimated positions, essentially shooting at phantoms. Engine sound would resume only after bomb detonations. The psychological effect on my gunners was severe and cumulative. We feared the silence more profoundly than the explosives themselves. Learning post-war they were female pilots added to the comprehensive sense that we had fundamentally underestimated every aspect of this enemy's capability and determination." Common themes emerged across testimonies with remarkable consistency. Nearly every German soldier or pilot mentioned the silence and its profound psychological impact. Failed interceptions due to speed differential appeared in virtually all pilot accounts. Almost universal shock characterized responses upon learning the pilot's gender. Many attempted rationalization, suggesting Soviet propaganda had exaggerated female involvement or that women served only auxiliary roles. Others admitted candidly that gender made no operational difference, that effectiveness was what mattered. Variations of "we couldn't intercept what we couldn't match in speed" appeared across dozens of testimonies. Several Germans mentioned specific Night Witches by reputation or distinctive aircraft markings, though rarely knowing names. Consistent acknowledgement emerged that propaganda about Soviet inferiority and female incapacity had been comprehensively incorrect. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without initially knowing her identity. Lieutenant Stefan Richter, infantry officer who served near Taman Peninsula, provided detailed account. There was one aircraft our unit learned to recognize by distinctive pattern of repair patches covering both wings. This particular aircraft appeared over our positions on average twice weekly for 14 months. We called it Der Geist, the ghost, because it invariably arrived in complete silence. I personally witnessed this aircraft's attacks 23 times. On March 17, 1943, it destroyed our primary ammunition depot, killing 11 men and eliminating 3 weeks of artillery shells. On June 2nd, it struck our forward command post, killing our battalion commander and 2 company commanders. After the war, cross-referencing Soviet records with our incident reports, I learned this was almost certainly Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova. She had flown 852 missions total. We never came remotely close to shooting her down. She was completely untouchable. Popova likely never knew that Germans captured during these operations would later testify about her specifically. Her mission tempo never slackened during the period when German prisoners were being interrogated about Night Witch encounters. By war's end, her mission count stood at 852, part of the regiment's collective 24,000 missions that had cost Germany millions in resources and thousands of casualties. Her legendary 18 missions in a single night and her overall 852 sorties became documented not merely in Soviet military records, but in German testimonies that confirmed from the enemy's perspective what Soviet reports had claimed. Her post-war reflection, when informed that German prisoners had spoken of her aircraft specifically, was characteristically direct. We did what our country required. Whether they respected us or feared us or felt humiliated by us was entirely their concern. Our concern was victory, and we achieved it. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late during the war. The Night Witches were not anomalies, not propaganda, not isolated exceptions. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible 4 years earlier. She had completed 852 individual combat missions, more sorties than entire bomber squadrons flew collectively. Her operational period spanned from June 1942 through May 1945, nearly 3 full years of continuous night operations. Total flight hours exceeded 1,400, accumulated in increments of 90 minutes to 2 hours per mission, night after night without respite. She dropped approximately 200 kilograms of bombs per mission, totaling over 170 tons of high explosives delivered directly onto German positions. She survived the entire war without being shot down by enemy action, despite flying through conditions that killed 32 of her fellow Night Witches. Soviet High Command awarded her the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest military decoration, along with multiple orders of the Red Banner and Red Star. Her 852 missions represented an average of 28 sorties per month sustained across 36 months, flying even during brutal winters that froze breath to cockpit instruments and through injuries that would have grounded less determined pilots. The human cost behind these numbers told a different story. Permanent frostbite scarring covered her hands and face from 3 years of exposure to -40-degree temperatures in open cockpits. Hearing damage from 100 hours of engine noise at close range left permanent impairment. The psychological resilience required to climb into that wooden aircraft 852 times, knowing each mission could be the last, each landing could fail in darkness, each German searchlight could mean death, exceeded normal human capacity. 22 of her closest friends died during operations she survived. The regiment lost 32 killed from approximately 80 personnel. She attended their funerals, then flew missions that same night. The weight of 852 missions meant 852 moments of absolute vulnerability, 852 gambles with mortality, 852 decisions to continue despite fear. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters profoundly. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots flew 40 to 60 missions before rotation, injury, or death. The United States Army Air Forces rotated bomber crews home after 25 missions, considering that sufficient exposure to combat stress. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American combat tours. Average Soviet male bomber pilots flew 150 to 300 missions during the war. The 588th Regiment average stood at 500 to 600 missions. Popova exceeded regimental average by 40% and exceeded typical Soviet bomber pilot totals by nearly 3 times. Her 852 missions represented more combat sorties than some entire bomber groups accumulated collectively. At 2 hours per mission average, she spent 704 hours airborne under combat conditions. Dropping 200 kilograms per mission, totaled 170 tons of explosives personally delivered. German estimates suggested her missions alone inflicted approximately 800 casualties, destroyed dozens of vehicles, eliminated countless tons of supplies, and disrupted operations across 3 years. By any metric, Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to form all-female combat units. The regiment flew approximately 24,000 combat sorties between May 1942 and May 1945, maintaining operations continuously across 3 years without pause. Total ordnance dropped exceeded 3,000 tons of high explosives. German casualties directly attributable to night witch operations were estimated at over 5,000 killed or wounded. Material destruction included hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, countless supply depots, communication centers, and forward installations. Regiment casualties totaled 32 killed from approximately 80 pilots and navigators, yielding a 96% survival rate. Comparable conventional Soviet bomber units suffered 40 to 60% casualties. The cost-effectiveness calculation revealed stunning asymmetry. The regiment cost approximately $2 million to establish and maintain. Damage inflicted on German forces exceeded $50 million in destroyed material alone. German expenditure attempting to counter night witch operations totaled over 125 million Reichsmarks for anti-aircraft ammunition, fighter sorties, searchlight batteries, and personnel dedicated to night defense. The cost ratio stood at approximately 160. Soviets invested 1 ruble. Germans spent 60 trying to stop them. German fighters achieved 0 confirmed aerial kills against night witches. Nearly all regiment losses came from ground fire, not air combat. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the night witches provided. Psychological warfare degraded German troop morale through sustained sleep deprivation and constant fear of silent attacks. Over 5,000 German soldiers were diverted from frontline combat duties to air defense operations specifically targeting night witches. Supply lines were systematically disrupted, forcing longer and more vulnerable routes that consumed additional fuel and time. Propaganda value proved immense, demonstrating Soviet women could fight effectively and boosting morale across Soviet forces. German miscalculations were comprehensively exposed, revealing critical flaws in Wehrmacht intelligence assessment and tactical doctrine. The night witches became a model for asymmetric warfare, proving irregular tactics could achieve strategic impact against technologically superior forces. Marshal Georgy Zhukov noted in his memoirs, "The 588th Regiment achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." Their effectiveness validated principles of asymmetric warfare that challenged conventional military thinking. The regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering advantages. Popova's 852 missions embodied this principle completely. After the war ended, Popova faced challenges different from nightly combat, but no less demanding. Initial recognition came swiftly. Hero of the Soviet Union, victory parades through Moscow, speeches before crowds celebrating Soviet triumph. But returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat proved psychologically difficult. The transition from 852 missions to ordinary existence created profound dislocation. She continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor, teaching new generations of Soviet pilots. She married a fellow pilot in 1946, raised a family while maintaining connection to aviation throughout her life. Speaking about her wartime experiences came reluctantly at first. The memories carried weight that made casual discussion impossible. She maintained close relationships with surviving squadron mates, attending annual reunions where they remembered the 32 who never came home. She became an advocate for women in Soviet military service, arguing that her record and her sister's records proved women could serve in any capacity effectively. Soviet recognition fluctuated with political climate. Stalin's government celebrated war heroes selectively, suppressing those who might challenge his personal mythology. Later Soviet governments embraced the night witches more fully, incorporating their story into official military history and using them as examples of Soviet achievement. Popova lived until 2013, reaching 91 years old, long enough to see her story recognized internationally. Her funeral in Moscow drew thousands, including surviving night witches, Russian military officials, and international aviation historians. For decades, the night witches remained virtually unknown in the West. Cold War tensions meant Soviet military achievements were dismissed or suppressed as propaganda. Western historians doubted claims that seemed improbable, women flying wooden biplanes achieving such results against German forces. The 1980s and 1990s brought glasnost, allowing more complete stories to emerge from Soviet archives. Historians gained access to records, testimonies, and documentation that validated accounts previously dismissed. Books and documentaries through the 2000s and 2010s brought night witch stories to Western audiences. German testimonies proved crucial, validating Soviet claims with enemy confirmation. The recognition shifted from skeptical dismissal to understanding. This was documented history, not exaggeration. Modern recognition includes museums throughout Russia featuring night witch exhibits, monuments and memorials in cities where they operated, schools and streets named after regiment members. Films, books, and documentaries continue telling their story. Popova specifically received numerous honors, including having schools named after her and appearing in multiple historical documentaries before her death. The story reached audiences who found it almost impossible to believe until confronted with overwhelming evidence. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the night witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons that resonate beyond World War II's Eastern Front. About warfare, it demonstrated that asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority when properly employed. Psychological impact sometimes matters more than physical destruction, as German morale degradation from night witch operations exceeded material losses. Innovation and tactical creativity trump resource advantages and technological sophistication. Underestimating any enemy based on preconceptions creates fatal vulnerabilities. German assumptions about gender and obsolete equipment blinded them to genuine threat assessment. About determination, flying 852 missions required extraordinary resilience that exceeded normal human capacity. Each mission could be fatal, yet she continued, accepting risk 852 separate times. The physical toll was permanent, the psychological weight immense, yet survival required skill, luck, and absolute refusal to quit. About physics and engineering, sometimes simple designs beat complex ones in specific operational contexts. Canvas proved superior to metal in this environment. Understanding operational conditions matters more than abstract specifications, as the stall speed paradox demonstrated. Constraints force innovation, rather than preventing it. The silence tactic emerged from engine limitations but became a devastating weapon. The right tool for the job isn't always the most advanced option available. When Oberst Heinrich Krieger stood before his pilots in February 1943, laughing at women flying crop dusters, he represented every military officer who made assumptions based on prejudice rather than intelligence. When German engineers calculated that speed, metal, and modern technology must defeat slow, wood, and obsolete, they forgot that physics itself can be exploited rather than merely obeyed. When Wehrmacht High Command dismissed the night witches as temporary harassment requiring no special countermeasures, they committed the fatal error of underestimating an enemy based on who they were, rather than what they could do. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions, part of her regiment's collective 24,000 sorties, proved that courage doesn't require the best equipment, that skill can overcome raw power, and that determination makes conventional calculations irrelevant. Her missions weren't just successful operations, They were systematic proof that the Germans had calculated everything except the variable that mattered most. The will to fight matched with tactical innovation. In wooden biplanes that shouldn't have worked against an enemy that refused to take them seriously until too late. The night witches proved the most dangerous weapon isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes it's the one your enemy never sees coming until silence gives way to explosions, and darkness reveals that what you dismissed as impossible has been destroying you all along.